last year, I believe, a huge modern facility with multiple buildings with 1,900 luxury apartments now takes that space and more. I don't have a picture of that. Most of these are not going to be, a couple of them are then and now, but most of them are not then and now, unless there was something very interesting about the now. So we'll go back and look at some fires in the 1850s, and that made a big difference in some of the building here. At least 6 very destructive fires burned between December 1849 and June 1851. After each fire, a lot of the people who have been living here have been planning to go to the gold fields. It was the mid-50s and 1850s, it was during the gold rush. And so they just built, they stayed in tents, or they built very ramshackle buildings that were extremely flammable. And then they would burn down, and they would burn most of the area that was at the town. And so they very quickly started building again, often in the same ramshackle fashion. So there was another fire and another fire. And, okay, this didn't get changed. Okay. And eventually they began building a little bit better houses that were a little bit stronger, were not just plywood shacks, and the buildings withstood much better. Another thing that was hit by fire has been multiple cliff houses. This is the very first built in 1863 at the end of Point Lobos Road. In 1883, Adolf Sutro bought the building, and he was remodeling it, having it redone. And before the renovations were complete, it caught on fire and burned down. And so Sutro built this, and we all recognize this. He spent $75,000 in 1863 to have this built. It was an 8-story high building designed for dancing, dining, and entertainment. And it became a top destination for San Francisco, for San Franciscans and for visitors. And it survived the 1906 earthquake and fire, but then in 1907 it burned down. And by that point, Adolf Sutro was no longer alive, and so his heirs had to take care of it and figure what to do. Now, this is the blooper in the book, and on the left is the building that Lucky Baldwin, that was his nickname, Elias Jackson Baldwin, he wanted to build a hotel that would compete with the New Palace Hotel and attract the elite. And so he built the Baldwin Hotel and Theater at Market and Powell Streets. And it was successful for almost 30 years, but on November 23rd, 1898, fire destroyed the building. And on the right, you see the burned building. Sorry, you see these. This is the burned building. This is the building that should be in the book, and it isn't because I sent them the wrong photo. So it's a mistake. So the book is, if you buy a book here, you're going to get a little erratum sheet that explains that one's not right. That if it goes into second printing, they will. They promised me they will fix it. Another church that burned was first of all, there is the original First Mary's Cathedral, which is at California and Grant, and it's still there, and they still have services. But the second St. Mary's Cathedral is shown here, and it was built on Van Ness Avenue in 1891, and it burned down in 1962 now. The book doesn't talk about this, but first of all, this is what took its place, a very modern building, and I can't believe I never noticed this other thing. But first of all, this very modern building, which columnist Herb King referred to as the washing machine agitator and Our Lady of Maytag. And I mean, I know that I refer to the washing machine agitator periodically, and people know exactly what I'm talking about. The thing is, there's also this shadow that appears on the building. And this photograph was taken by Ron Hengler, a wonderful photographer. And it's, you said that it appears every day at 2 o'clock. 10 and 2. 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock, at least if the sun's shining. And it has gotten to be known as the 2 o'clock titty. I never even saw that the whole time that I was putting this together. And the first,
could be a high heel. The back of a shoe.
well, right now the thing is, I gave this talk for another history group, and they talked about the 2 o'clock titty, and I had not even noticed it. So that just shows that what I don't know. But so thank you, Ron, for a wonderful photo. Like most of them, all of them probably. Okay, so then we'll go into the 1906 earthquake, one of my favorite photos. April 18th, 1906, San Francisco suffered the event that we're probably the most famous for. It made thousands of people homeless and destroyed at least 28,000 buildings. Now, one of the buildings, this is the City Hall that they had just opened 6 years before. They started construction on this in 1872, and as you can read here, they promised to finish it in 3 years. It took 27 years. It opened in 1899, and it was touted as being earthquake-proof, or earthquake-resistant, and this happened very quickly in the 1906 earthquake. That it was pretty much destroyed. And there was a lot of, obviously there was a lot of scandal about the amount of time it took to build and how badly it was built. There was a lot of talk afterward about building a new city hall. And so after 7 years, there were some delays, but after 7 years, they opened, or the land was broken for a new city hall in 1930. Sorry, I guess we don't show the current one. So the Sweeny Observatory, let me slow down a bit. Okay. The new city hall opened in April 1913, and that's the one we use today. It's been around for a long time. Another event is Sweeny's Observatory. Thomas Sweeny lived in the Sunset District at 7th and Judith Street, and he built this observatory on the top of Strawberry Hill in the middle of Stowe Lake, which might have its name changed soon. One published article, what people would do is walk up the hill or ride their horses up the hill and go up to the second floor and look out and get a 360-degree view of San Francisco. Well, you would never get that view now because of all the trees that are upbuilt, that have been planted and grown. And you get a view of downtown, but you don't get much of any other view. But the issue is that one of the things that was written about this observatory at that time was that it was earthquake resistant. And that's what happened. This is a postcard that shows the observatory after the earthquake. And it was never rebuilt. Now, it's believed that San Francisco might have recovered really quickly from the earthquake were it not for fires that burned a lot of the city. The earthquake had broken multiple water mains, so the fires continued for more than 3 days. And about 500 blocks and 28,000 buildings were destroyed. That means destroyed, vanished. They were gone. Here's a view of the fire that began, one of the fires. Now, some people believe that, well, first, I'll talk about this. There was a ban on cooking inside your home until your home, your flue had, or your stove had been inspected. The fires that destroyed much of the city were blamed on what was called the ham and eggs fire, which was when someone tried to cook breakfast on a stove with a damaged flue. At that point, San Francisco authorities banned, prohibited all cooking inside until the flues passed the safety inspection. And so here you see that there are people who on their streets had dragged out their stoves. Some of them put little things around them to kind of cover them up. But this happened all over the city, especially in the neighborhoods. Those, I mean, we don't see any stoves on the street anymore, so those are things. Here are some 3 images. No, this is not 3 images, sorry. This is a building. This is a building that might have survived, that probably survived the earthquake, but didn't survive the fire, because it's still standing quite strongly, but the interior and the roof were completely overwhelmed by the fire, and everything was destroyed, so nothing remained except the brick shell. Now there are the 3 images of Chinatown by Getty, well-known photographer, looking down toward the fire. Now these people are standing there looking down, believing it's enormous, but not really thinking that they were in any danger. But all of these areas were completely burned out by the end of the fire. Okay, and then there are these images show entire neighborhoods of the city that just vanished, just disappeared after the earthquake and the fire. And it really shows that the fire did a lot of it. If you notice, there are a lot of chimneys that are still up all around. When you see that, you know that it wasn't an earthquake that destroyed these buildings, because the fire, the chimneys are still up. So the earthquake hit the building, and then the fire came and destroyed everything else. And this is a great map that shows really how much was burned in San Francisco. At this time, this whole area, almost no one lived out here. And most people lived east of, to the right of this rule. And the area with the white that's outlined, that entire area burned to the ground by the end of the earthquake and fire. Let's see what else.
Where's Van Ness up there? That was a line.
There, no.
No.
That's Embarcadero.
I'm sorry, what?
Van Ness.
I know, I heard the question, I didn't hear what other.
Where was the Van Ness line back there?
Oh, I don't know, but I thought somebody was
I
pointing
do.
out.
It's the fire line.
It's
The
the
fire
fire
line,
line.
okay,
It's
so
a fire line.
the big black rule is Van Ness.
No, but it's in the big black rule would be Divisadero or something.
Divisadero.
The fire came to Van Ness, and so it's within
Oh,
that
I'm
little
sorry.
area.
Yeah, so Van Ness is probably around here.
Because it was a wide street, they were able to contain it by dynamite
Right.
buildings and keep it from going, except for the Hayes Valley where it went over a little bit.
Yeah, sorry, the rule, that rule is not. Okay. This is an interesting photo that I got from the San Jose State University Library. What happened after the city kind of decided that it needed to pull itself together, people were staying in tents. Many people left the city, and the winter was coming. And so there was this great charitable undertaking where over 5,600 one-room cottages were built for the refugees of the earthquake and fire. Now, where these are standing is now Dolores Park. Before, it had been a Jewish cemetery until 1905, and then it became a park. And they put these cottages here for people to live in. They're all gone. There are still a few around, a handful around the city that get discovered every now and then, but there's nothing anywhere near 5,600 that we found. The building in the background shows something else that's interesting, and that this is the original Mission High School. It burned down in, let's see, it was built in 1896 and it burned down in 1922. And they built the current Mission High on the same spot. And so the things in this picture are gone. So another earthquake that many of us have experienced is the Lower Crater earthquake of 1989. The Embarcadero Freeway opened in 1959. It was Freeway 480. It cast a shadow on the iconic ferry building and cut off the plaza from walkers and drivers. If you watch the movie The Lineup, which was made in 1958, the final scene is on the completed freeway before it opened. Many people over the years, including me, wanted the freeway to be torn down. Although many also, like me, felt it would cost too much money, so we probably couldn't do it. Other people liked it, especially people going to Chinatown. It was easy access. But what happened was that Mother Nature took care of it, and it was damaged so badly in 1989 that it was torn down in 1991. And it is gone, and we have a beautiful plaza down by the ferry building now. Another victim of the 1989 earthquake was the Cypress structure in Oakland, and that was where it was a double-decker freeway, and it pancaked. The upper deck fell on the lower deck, and actually 42 people died as a result of that. At the time, a lot of the neighbors who lived around there were trying to help people get out. And this is a photo that was taken at that time. Another victim was this one of the original eastern span of the Bay Bridge. We have the western span, which is a suspension bridge from the city to Yerba Buena Island. And it's also the Willie Brown Jr. Bridge. And then the cantilever bridge was from the island, from Yerba Buena Island to Oakland. And that's what this was. And it, that span was open, let's see. This is what happened to the cantilever bridge in 1989. Part of it collapsed onto the lower deck of the bridge. Of course, some of us were in our cars driving home from work, and we were hearing that the Bay Bridge had collapsed, which was a little bit stronger than what happened, but that part did. And they eventually built a new suspension type bridge between Yerba Buena and Oakland. That opened in 2013, and then they tore down this old bridge. This photo shows 3 important buildings, 2 of which no longer exist. On the left is the Fillmore Auditorium, which is still there. Famous for music in the 60s especially. This building was the Beth Israel Synagogue, and it later held art by designer Tony Duquette. It and all the art was destroyed by fire in 1989 after the earthquake. And the one on the right was originally the Albert Pike Scottish Rite Temple. Later, it was the center of Jim Jones People's Temple. And they moved out in 1977 when they went to Jonestown, Guyana. The 2 buildings on the right were torn down, and now there's a post office in that spot. Now, a lot of these images show views, a lot of them show views of things that you'll never see again, that they vanished with development. This was in around 1900, this was 19th Avenue. just before Golden Gate Park, a few blocks before Northwood. And you can actually see, I talked about Sweeny's Observatory. It's up here, Strawberry Hill. Another thing that's pretty good. Now it's hard to imagine, but now it handles about 50,000 cars a day, and that's the way it looked in 1900. Then there's this view looking westward of, in the early 1900s, and Carl Larson's Chicken Ranch is right here. Let's see, I don't have it right now. It was between 16th and 17th Avenues and Moraga and Noriega. The Central Ocean Road, I won't talk about that. No. And this area here, this dark area here, is Golden Gate Park. It's already been developed. But the rest of it is essentially sand dunes and the scrub brush that grows the sand. No sign of the dunes can be seen today. The actual, what is believed to have been the last sand dune in the Sunset District was covered in 1969 when they built St. Ignatius High School. This is something that they called the Boneyard. It was originally the Market Street Railway Company in the late 1800s. They owned this block, which is bound by Lincoln Way, Irving Street, 14th and 15th, or Funston and 14th Avenue. And the Market Street Railway had planned to build a car barn there, a building where the streetcars and buses would go for repairs. And they never did it. But what they began doing was dumping all their obsolete and broken down cars there. And it was known as the Boneyard. And in around the 40s, they sold the land. I think Market Street Railway had gone out of business at that point. And they sold the land. And now it's Andronico's grocery store, and behind that, an big apartment complex. Now this is Lombard Street, looking west from Leavenworth to Hyde. It was once kind of a steep country road, but this is how it looks today. So that's vanished, that is gone, and this is what we see today. And I wanted to include Doyle Drive because it was a really interesting road to the Golden Gate Bridge. It was an elevated highway. Probably most of you have ridden on it because it hasn't been closed that long. It's approximately 1.6 miles long and connected San Franciscans with the Golden Gate Bridge. But it was very dangerous. First of all, the road itself was two-way, I think 3 lanes in both ways with nothing dividing them. So there were head-on collisions kind of pretty often, and bad ones. It was damaged in the 1989 quake, and some repairs were made. But by the early 2000s, federal highway officials gave the road a safety rating of 2 out of 100. I remember once hearing someone interviewed on the radio who said, someone with the federal highway people, and he said, there aren't too many places that we say for certain would be destroyed if we had a good earthquake, but that road would fall down. There's no doubt. So they did tear it down, and they replaced it by the ground level Presidio Parkway, which opened in 2015. Okay, I wanted to do more with the 3 different fairs that we had. We had the 1894 California Midwinter Fair in Golden Gate Park. There was the Panama Pacific International Exposition in 1915, and the Golden Gate International Exposition on Treasure Island in 1939-40, the only one where an island was built in order to have a fair. But I didn't want to do all of them. What happens with these fairs is these exhibits are built, and they're built not to last. I mean, they're not built well enough to last. They're not expected to. And so almost all of them no longer exist in any form. There are some buildings on Treasure Island that date back to the fair, but no exhibits are still standing. But there was an overview here's an overview of the Panama Pacific International Exposition in 1915, and I'll give this example because it's kind of interesting to me that originally when they were tearing all this down in order to build what became the Marina District, there was a preservation league, and they wanted to save 3 buildings. Thank you, Richard. One of them, on the left, is the Palace of Fine Arts. That was one of them. One of them was the 185 feet high Column of Progress. And the other one, the third one, is right there, and it was the California Counties building. So this preservation group hoped to save these, but the only one that was saved was the Palace of Fine Arts, designed by Bernard Maybeck and photographed by Ron Hengler. Again. So the next thing is entertainment on the west side of the city. In 1896, Adolf Sutro opened Sutro Baths, a huge facility that was popular for many years. It had 7 pools at differing temperatures, plus slides, trapezes, springboards, and a high dive. The baths could accommodate 10,000 people at any one time. And for a while afterward, when Adolf Sutro had died and it wasn't as popular as a pool anymore, the pools were covered over and it was an ice skating rink. Again, the lineups, you should all go see the lineup. It's really got great views of 1958 San Francisco. And it includes a scene showing the upstairs museum part of Sutro Baths. I had never seen live footage until I saw that movie. I'd never seen live footage of Sutro Baths. And the entire baths closed, even the ice skating rink and everything, closed in 1966 and then burned later that year, burned under suspicious conditions. It's now owned by the Golden Gate Recreational Area, the National Park Service, and the whole area, the ruins are open to the public. And if you remember the movie Harold and Maude in 1971 had a scene at the ruins of Sutro Baths. Another western, there was a lot of water related to things going on the western side of town. And this is an aerial view of Fleischacker Pool. It opened in 1925. It was one of the longest outdoor pools in the world. Supposedly the pool was heated, but I never really talked to anyone who wasn't freezing, and I mean, it was cold.
If the sun shines, it was heated.
Oh, if the sun shone, yeah, if the sun could heat it, then maybe it would be. Olympic swimmers, including Johnny Weissmuller and Ann Curtis, practiced Fleischacker. The pool was so large that lifeguards patrolled in rowboats. There were 6 million gallons of water, all pumped in directly from the nearby Pacific Ocean. Because this is right out, if you go back to the left of that, right here is beach and the ocean. And they had a pipe that just pumped the water in. And of course, there was Playland. The Whitney brothers took over a collection of amusement rides and concessions along the Great Highway. And they opened it in 1926 as Playland at the Beach. It was 3 blocks of, only 3 blocks, it just feels as if it was so much more. 3 blocks of amusements, including a roller coaster, merry-go-round, and funhouse, plus various other rides, concessions, and restaurants. And it began to decline in the 1960s as families had cars and began traveling outside of San Francisco to warmer climates for recreation and vacation. And some Playland concessions closed, and the park became kind of faded and dirty, and a real estate developer purchased it and closed it over Labor Day weekend, 1972, and it was immediately torn down. And condominiums that have forever had problems were built on the property. Another thing that is banished from San Francisco are elephants at the zoo. The Fleischhacker Zoo, now called San Francisco Zoo, opened in 1929. And there were elephants there for 75 years. But in the early 2000s, people at the zoo and animal activists disagreed on the elephant's quality of life. In 2004, the Board of Supervisors banned elephants from the zoo unless a new 15-acre elephant enclosure would be built, which wasn't going to happen. The last elephant left in 2004, bound for an animal sanctuary. And then here are just some other things that don't fit into categories. This was Abe Warner. He had something called the Cobweb Palace. It's a bar and restaurant at Meigs Wharf in 1856. And Meigs Wharf was one of the large wharfs that went way out into the bay. Although this place was right at the bay meeting. It had unusual objects and live animals, including monkeys and parrots and other animals. But the thing that it was most known for were the cobwebs. Warner never removed a spider or a spider web. They just were allowed to stay there. And he eventually sold the building in 1893, and it was torn down immediately in New Orleans. Another thing that is gone is the original Mission Bay. Today, we think of Mission Bay as a lot of apartment and condo developments. It was a real bay at one time. It was a natural habitat for ducks, geese, herons, and ospreys. In the mid-1800s, it became a dumping ground for building projects and later for earthquake debris. And then they filled it in, and it's now filled with condos and apartments in Kaiser and other medical centers. UCSF, okay.
Yeah.
Right, that's right.
And the Warriors Arena.
And what?
The Warriors.
Arena, Shade Center.
Say it one more time.
Shady Center for the Warriors.
Oh, is that what that is?
Yeah.
I don't even know where that is, that big round thing.
McCovey Cove is what's left of Mission Bay. That's the only water element remaining.
And you do see water, because I've
There's
been
water.
around there, and there is water between all the apartments.
McCovey Cove.
What cove?
McCovey Cove.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah,
McCovey.
because it's related to the ballpark. Okay, McCovey Cove. Okay, that's on the eastern side. On the western side of the city, in the late 1800s, horse-drawn cars were being converted to electric cars and cable cars. And some of the obsolete cars were just set out on undeveloped land near Ocean Beach. At first, it became popular as meeting places for bicycle clubs and card playing groups and more casual things like that. But eventually, people began using them as homes. And they would buy them for $10 if they didn't have seats and $20 if they did have seats. And some people created 3-story buildings with cars. And with a lot of times they did a U-shaped thing, so they have a courtyard in between. It began to disappear after 1906 when people began to want more permanent housing. And they were worried they were going out there to try to get it. And so most of these have disappeared. Again, every once in a while, there is one place out there, and I don't have the photo in the book, so I'm not showing it here. But there is a photo of a couple of cable cars and a couple of streetcars put together, and it's you can see the outside of it, I think, off the Great Highway, but you don't know what it is because all the the things that look like cars are in the back of the building behind the tall fence.
Whereabouts is it?
It's really near, it's really near Judah, Irving, Judah, kind of that end of Great Highway. It has a red garage door, I think. Anyway, but you can't tell what it is. But Woody LaBounty got some photographs from the people who were renting it at one point. So I know that it's real. Does anyone ever ask you where the beach is in North Beach? This is an 1866 photograph that shows that there was a beach there originally. It was on the north coast of San Francisco at the bay. And like many coastal areas in San Francisco, part of the bay was filled in during the 19th century, and part of that eliminated the beach. So there's no more beach in North Beach. This was the San Francisco's Hall of Justice before they tore it down. It was at 750 Kearny Street from 1910 to 1967. And if you ever watched, if you ever watched Ironside on TV, 1967 to 1975, which is after it was torn down, they had out in exterior shots of the building because that was where Raymond Burr had his offices.
Also the TV series, The Lineup.
The lineup,
So it's in the lineup too?
The TV series.
the TV series, nothing but.
Or San Francisco Beat. That's
Yeah.
what you do it.
Yeah.
A TV show.
It's
but,
it's only a block and a half from here.
Yes, very close to here. What they did was they built a Holiday Inn with an overhead walkway to over Kearny. And so Hurricane always called it the bridge over the River Kearny. And now the Holiday Inn is Hilton, but it's still there.
Do we know why they tore this building down?
Because they built a new one.
They built the new one south of Market
Yeah.
on Bryant Street, and I think this was much smaller, and it probably was not as modernized as the new one became, which has the jail in it.
Jail, ground floor.
Yeah. Okay, and this is an interesting story. I don't know how many of you may have gone to this, but in early February 1992, I was one of the golfers. The apartment, this big apartment building began to move, and the residents were quickly evacuated. And they were trying to tear the building down, and they couldn't get it to fall down. And people started gathering at the bottom. I promise I didn't do this. People were gathering at the bottom to encourage the house to fall. And soon, all the cheering switched. They were encouraging the building to withstand the engineers' efforts to tear it down. And on February 29th, the workers pulled the building away from the cliff, and it fell and was destroyed in the ground below. And this is right by the Filbert Street steps. Nobody was hurt. Everything was okay, but that building is gone forever. Another building gone forever is the Jack Tarver Hotel. It opened on Van Ness in 1960. It was advertised as, quote, the world's most modern hotel, with a rooftop ice skating rink, electronic check-in. San Francisco has always had a love-hate relationship with this building. And it didn't make any difference when they changed the name to Cathedral Hill in 1982. It closed in October 2009, and it was torn down 4 years later and replaced by the California Pacific Medical Center. They painted it all white before that. Before they tore it down. For a couple of years, it was all white instead of the weird colors. This is the Xerces blue butterfly. It's the first North American butterfly believed to have become extinct because of human activity. The Xerces blue was native to sand dunes and common in the San Francisco Sunset District. Development in the Sunset during the 1930s and 40s destroyed the lupin and other native dune plants essential to the habitat to keep this butterfly going. The last one was seen in the Presidio in the early 1940s, and it was declared extinct. It is vanished. Another thing that some of you, if you were here, you're going to remember these, are these gas holders. The gasometers is the other name they give them. They were here from the early 1900s through the 1960s, and they were in all neighborhoods. They were everywhere. This is Fisherman's Wharf, but you could just see them in any neighborhood all around the city. Each one stored about 2 million cubic feet of natural gas. The movable cap rose and fell depending on how much gas was being stored. They began to disappear in San Francisco, and I sure didn't notice. I don't know if anyone else did, but they began when the technology of gas storage changed, and it was no longer being used that way. Another thing you might remember is the Hands Beer sign. To the delight of Central Freeway riders, a neon sign was installed in 1954 on top of the Hands Beer building at 1550 Pine Street. The neon sign showed a 13-foot high glass filling with beer, complete with white foam head at the top. The brewery closed in 1975 and the glass disappeared. The building is still there, but the sign is long gone. The building is now holds offices. Okay, are you ready, Lana? Okay. The one thing, this is the last thing we're going to look at, I think, yes. Foghorns are heard when the fog goes below the Golden Gate Bridge, as in this photograph. They are turned on and off. The foghorns are turned on and off manually. To guide ships, they start working when, well, as I said, when fog is below the bridge. The original foghorn in San Francisco was two-toned. It sounded a little like this. Two-toned. Can you do that again, but not cover your mouth? Of course not. Okay. Some of us are a little nostalgic that we just have one foghorns now. But what happened was in the late 1970s, one of the original, there have been foghorns on the bridge since 1937, since it opened. And one of the original foghorns stopped working when its two air valves gave out. And the two-tone foghorn became one-tone. The mechanism was so old that they couldn't get replacement parts. So in 1985, the horns were replaced by new single-tone horns. And if you ever listened to the radio station KFOG, which no longer exists, they, in their little melody, their little advertisement, they had the two-tone foghorn. And you can hear it on YouTube, but otherwise you won't ever hear it here.
Oh.
And that's it. Are there any questions? Yeah.
Okay, starting from this one and then going back to the beginning, is that San Francisco at one time, it was a maritime city with water on three sides, and it was surrounded on the water sides with distinctive foghorns that had a rhythm and a number of blasts, so that someone who's familiar could be downtown and say, oh, it's foggy there because I hear that foghorn, or it's foggy out there because I hear that foghorn. So it was.
Can you all hear him?
Yeah.
So it was a real San Francisco treat, to coin a phrase. And going back to the early picture you showed of the Del Webb townhouse, Del Webb was the owner of the New York Yankees. And when they came out for the World Series in 1962, the Yankees stayed at the townhouse. And us kids went down there hanging around trying to see Mickey Mantle and Yogi Berra. Never did.
Get autographs.
Never did. Some might have. but that was a real magnet for, little baseball fans.
Well, I think you might have been the only one who, the only ones who were magnetized by Bill West.
It wasn't the structure, it was the tenant.
Yeah. And I know there were a lot of different, I read that there were a lot of different foghorns, and you could really tell where it was foggy because they were making this noise. But I don't think there are any foghorns now in the city, except for on the Golden Gate Bridge. Am I wrong?
I don't know. So I wonder why, since there's so much romance with those old foghorns, and we love them so much, why, please tell me why, Willie Brown didn't go through some trouble to try to get a foghorn that sounded a little closer to that, instead of this.
Well, they don't make anything like that. From what I understand, they don't make anything like that. They make foghorns that are single, but they're different sounds.
Right.
But they're not two-tone.
But they could have tried to get a haunting sound.
Sure. The electronics today can create that, that's for sure.
Well, actually, if you look on YouTube, some of the things other foghorns in San Francisco, they show the Golden Gate Bridge with fog, and you're hearing this thing that actually is haunting, even though it's only one tone. It's very haunting.
Well, we should have one like that.
Well, that's what we have.
You think we do?
Yes,
Yeah.
but it's not two-tone. There isn't a two-tone.
But it sounds haunting to you?
Sure, go to YouTube and look at it.
It means the fog's in, it's haunting.
Any other questions? I have books here, and they're normally $23.99 plus tax, and you can get them for $20.
Whoa, start the party.
All right, bye-bye.
Thank you.